Hello again, and welcome to Herd Immunity News. I'm Marcus Botza. Today, I have with me the leader of the Heritage Party. I have David Curtin. David Curtin is a regular on GB News. He's to be found all over the place. Please check out his Twitter account, his YouTube videos, which we will leave the links to, but also check out the Heritage Party itself. If you are looking for a party to crystallize your views and beliefs, certainly we would encourage you to check out David's fantastic websites and the Heritage Party website. But before we go on anymore, can I just say, David, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Really good to join you again, and thank you for your kind words about me and the Heritage Party. I'm just trying to make a difference, and everyone who's joined us is feeling the same thing. It's we live in crazy times. There's not a word for it. I mean, insanity is too shallow of a word for what's going on, but we just want to restore our nation and turn things the right way up again, like you do, and like
Yeah.
your viewers as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you stuck your head above the parapet, and I think you are, for us at Herd Immunity News, you were one of those prominent voices against the lockdowns and against the cost benefit analysis of using trial medications. And we salute your bravery for that. And on that same note, people can hold that hold that thought in mind about what you had to say about the lockdowns and the restrictions and the vaccinations. We're going to ask you about the Ukraine situation. Who's responsible for the Ukraine situation, David?
Victoria Newland is the main driving force behind this, and this goes back way before 2022, when that's what the mainstream media will say to you. The mainstream narrative is Putin woke up in the morning and he decided to invade Ukraine for no reason whatsoever. I mean, that's just absolute nonsense. So people don't do that. There's been a lot of stuff building up to this, going back a long time and many years, and it goes back to 2013, 2014, where the CIA, under the direction, if you like, of Victoria Newland in the Obama administration at that time, she was the Undersecretary of State, which is like the Foreign Secretary, instigated a coup, a color revolution in Ukraine, because the previous leader, Yanukovych, made a decision that he didn't want to join NATO and he didn't want to join the EU. But the powers that be in the Western world, not the people, but the globalist powers, weren't happy with that. They wanted to bring Ukraine into the EU and into NATO. So they instigated a revolution, the Maidan revolution in 2014. We've all seen it. Back then it was big news, obviously. And they put in a puppet, Poroshenko, who then changed the course of politics in Ukraine and started to then try to, lay the groundwork to come into the EU, to come into NATO. And then after Poroshenko, we got Zelensky. He was elected in 2019, actually on a platform of peace. He said to the people of Ukraine, we want peace with Russia. But that was a big bait and switch. And what happened is, and this has been admitted by Merkel and others, that the Minsk agreements that they put in place after the 2014 coup with Russia were just to give Ukraine time to arm and then to break the Minsk agreements, if you like. So the Minsk agreements were to give autonomy to Crimea and also to the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics in the east, in the Donbass region. We've all heard of them now, because they are areas with Russian majority people. And so they were to be left alone, to be autonomous. But obviously, the regimes put in place didn't do that. And they went bombing and shelling the mostly Russian population in the Donbass, in those autonomous areas, killed 14,000 people with the help of real neo-Nazis in the Azov battalion and so on. And we've seen this, they don't make it a secret. They wear the Wolfsangel on their armband, they have the black sun. Some of them even have swastikas that they fly around. These are real Nazis in Ukraine. And I'm taking a long time to answer this, but there's a lot to say. Between 2014 and 2022, even the Western mainstream media periodically put out pieces saying Ukraine has a Nazi problem, Ukraine has a far right problem, Ukraine has a white supremacy problem. But as soon as 2022 happened, they're like, oh no, there's no Nazis in Ukraine. And then when it was proven they were, it's like, oh, well, there's not that many Nazis, but they're not too bad. It's like, what on earth are the mainstream media talking about? They are spinning everything any way they can to talk up war. And they've just basically lost the plot. I mean, so that's what's happened. And, you need to go back to 2014, where it starts to get a full picture of what's happening now.
Absolutely, and it is a huge question, and it's a backstory that we should never forget because it's so essential and important to the future that people actually listen to those like yourself that understand the backstory and how how this is about, as many people say, empire building for the EU, for NATO, and their friends and the corporations attached to that. Because you correctly say the narrative is Mr. Zelensky good and we should give him absolutely everything, and he isn't doing anything wrong to his own people in his own country, and Mr. Putin evil, bad, give him nothing. And actually Biden called for regime change.
Yeah, I was actually ambushed on a mainstream media show. I went on the Piers Morgan show back in September 2022, and there was Piers Morgan on one side, Richard Tice on the other. They were ambushed me, and they basically, I was there because I had the wrong opinion. So they wanted someone to come in. They were all very nice before I went in. As soon as I got into the studio, I knew something was up. And so it was 10 minutes of them trying to take me down and make me look stupid without even, giving me time to answer a question properly. But I think I held my ground there. But I actually got Piers Morgan during the interview to actually admit, yes, he said, yes, I want regime change. I want Putin gone. And I think he said that without he got into such a state. I think he said that and his mask slipped. And then he said, what a lot of people are actually thinking. But, and this is the plan of some of the people in the American deep state. I mean, there's reports by the Rand Corporation saying that the best thing, our plan for Russia is to have a revolution, put in a puppet like they put in Ukraine, and divide Russia up into 18 or 19 different statelets, and then the United States could control those statelets, and then the corporations can pillage their resources. Now, I think Putin is very clever. He realized this was going on. And he's a judo master, he's a chess master. So he uses those understandings in order to prepare for what he knew was coming. And what he knew was coming, what the deep state in the West, what the globalists want. And I always say that you've got to separate the globalists from the people, because the ordinary people in the West don't want this. But what the globalists want, he saw it coming, he's prepared. And if you listen to some commentators, what they say was happening over the winter of 2021, 2022 was the Ukrainian armed forces were massing on the border of the Donbass, and they were going to make a lightning strike to take back the whole area and, basically do some ethnic cleansing of the Donbass, essentially. Putin knew that was happening, and so he went in to stop that. Now, that's not at all been mentioned on the mainstream media. It wouldn't be, but some commentators like Gonzalo Lira and others have suggested that that's what was taking place, and that's why he did what he did in terms of the special military operation in 2022.
Absolutely. I mean, we have it on record from the lips of the commander-in-chief of the Free West when asked about the Nord Stream pipeline. A German journalist asked him, she said, well, I don't understand, Mr. Biden. What do you mean that you're going to stop it? And he said, we will stop it. And then a little smile came over his face. And then the narrative that this was actually Mr. Putin and the Russians that blew up their own pipeline rather than switch it off. This is beyond lunacy, surely, David.
It's absolute nonsense. I mean, that was what they came out with immediately without any investigation. Look, Russia had spent $35 billion constructing this pipeline, and they were going to make a lot of money out of it. They were going to make a lot of money selling cheap, plentiful Russian gas to Germany and other countries in Europe. And, therefore, the German economy would benefit. The
Mm,
people in Germany and other countries would benefit because they'd be able to continue to grow their economy. But yeah, Biden said those things. It was
mm,
very creepy and it was very nefarious. And you could see, what's he got in mind? I mean, at the time when he said that, probably no one really registered because
no.
at the time, most people didn't know what Nord Stream was. But obviously, as the conflict went on and that was blown up
Mm,
in a terrorist attack, and it was a terrorist attack, then it became obvious that, he knew something that was going on. And then you had the report by Seymour Hersh,
yes.
the world-renowned investigative journalist, who's pointed the finger
Mm,
at the United States and Norway, and then
mm,
later on another article said the United Kingdom, to our shame, was involved in that as well. It's ridiculous to say that Russia did it. Of course they didn't. It's
yeah.
beyond belief. No,
And
and
it's
the Swedes say, "Oh, we've investigated, but we
mm.
don't know who did it." So
Well,
that tells you everything you need to know.
absolutely beyond anything that a Hollywood script can come up with. And all these people are net zero zealots. These are
Mm,
all environmentalists. And you think of the damage that's been done to the ecosystem, the
yeah.
marine life that's been poisoned, and the millions of people who will die as a consequence of the poisoning. But
Mhm.
again, the hypocrisy is just of historic levels.
Yeah, right. I mean, all that methane has gone into the atmosphere. I mean, it wasn't
Yeah.
even burned off. It was just gone. That will eventually react very slowly with oxygen and produce carbon dioxide and water vapor. But, it's there and it's very damaging and very
Yes.
harmful. It's been probably killed. We have no idea how much marine life it's killed as it bubbles through the
Correct.
water out of the holes in the pipelines. But, the ridiculous thing is, the West is still buying Russian gas
Mm,
because it's going through via China and India.
yeah.
So they're selling it to China and India. They're liquefying it, putting it on
Mm,
boats, sending it to Rotterdam, then deliquefying it, and then using
yeah.
it. But we're paying about 3 times the price for it. So, we're
That's right.
still using the
Well,
gas. It's just not coming directly from Russia through Nord Stream. So the whole thing is just utterly balmy. And,
I
and
mean,
also, another thing that Condoleezza Rice said, I think it was her, said, I think it was a few years ago, that said that, well, the Europeans need to change where they get their gas from. So they've
mm,
obviously got some plan, which is now being enacted as well. So the European nations are buying gas from North America as well, so the imports of liquefied natural gas from America have vastly increased. And so, of course, the American corporations are making lots of money because they've changed the markets. So, one aspect of this is financial. The other aspect of it is, the globalist plans and the
mm.
of the power hungry maniacs.
Well, you hear it, it fits into the narrative right on the back of COVID, doesn't it? About the rising cost of everything. I like to use the cost of lockdown crisis, that term, rather than the cost of pandemic crisis.
Mm.
They use it as the pandemic. This is the new pandemic, isn't it? This is the narrative that fits into almost every single member of parliament to a
Mm.
man, and almost every single media outlet in the West has taken one side of the debate, and that's Mr. Putin bad, Mr. Zelensky good. But if we can get on a little bit about what's going on, it seems to be the Black Sea has almost been totally controlled now by the Russians, and they're moving into Odessa. Why are those two regions so important to the conflict?
Yeah, well, I think the Russians were very, very generous, and they acted in incredible good faith to honor to put in place and honor the grain deal, where they
mm,
were allowing grain shipments to still come out of Ukraine and go to all around the world, basically, especially to African countries and so on.
mm,
But then the Zelensky regime, obviously backed by NATO, abused that deal, and then they were still sending warships and weapon ships out of Odessa. And then, last week we had the Kerch Bridge between
mm,
Crimea and the Russian mainland being bombed a second time, and it suggested that there were, British weapons and submersibles used in that attack. So, yeah, of course, Russia has acted
mm,
because their good faith was broken, essentially. So the Ukrainians have broken that good faith in the grain deal and used it to attack the Kerch Bridge. So now Russia has gone and said, well, we're not having that.
mm,
And their military is superior to the Ukrainian military in every way. They will win this conflict if it goes on, unless someone really is, that insane that they start
mm.
to deploy tactical nuclear weapons. I really hope that doesn't happen. But
Yeah,
just if it stays to sticking to boats and airplanes and
mm,
tanks and artillery, Russia is going to win inevitably in every single way. And they've now taken sea superiority in the Black Sea, and they needed to do that to stop the Kerch Bridge from being
mm.
attacked a third time. It's already been attacked twice, and they're not going to let that happen again.
No, absolutely, and it's almost sickening to see the likes of Tobias Elwood and Anthony Blinken. I'm sorry to say these names. I'll wash my mouth out later. But to hear the lies, to hear the propaganda coming out that Ukraine are winning this war and the Russians are terrified, we are smelling the dead bodies pile up. I mean, straight away, they've no respect for human life. These people are almost demonic in my book, because they are not interested in war. It's all about more people dying. It's all about power, control, resources. But doesn't it shock you as well to hear that there's nothing from any MP? We heard from Ben Wallace as he was leaving the door, kind of cowardly. He said, "Well, we're not Amazon." I mean, what did you think of the whole Ben Wallace comment to Zelensky saying we're not Amazon?
Well, I mean, that's one comment out of thousands of things he said. And over the last year and a half, well, he's done nothing but escalate war, give
Yeah,
more weapons, meet Zelensky, give more money, give more weapons, and talking about this and, talking about Russia being defeated, Ukraine winning, and so on. I think he was probably, a little bit perturbed at the NATO conference, because you could see the
mm,
strains coming out into the open at the NATO conference, as Zelensky himself said, blames the West to say, well, we're not winning because you're not giving us enough weapons and enough money, when, we've given them billions of
yeah,
pounds and huge amounts of weapons. I'm
40
not for
billion.
that. I'm totally against that. But so I think there's some genuine frustration there, because Zelensky
Mm,
appeared to be very, very ungrateful. But the NATO countries have no concern for Ukraine or the Ukrainian people. They're just using Ukraine as a hammer to hammer Russians. They don't care about Ukraine. But so there's lots of sort of cognitive dissonance
yeah,
everywhere among the people who are doing this. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't credit Ben Wallace with anything, because he's been one of the people who's been one of the prime warmongers over the
yeah.
last year.
And it shows you how deluded the Conservative Party are when Conservative Home did a popularity contest reading,
Mm,
and Ben Wallace was sitting at the top with 77%. So it shows how
unbelievable.
deluded a lot of poor people in the Conservative Party are. But as you correctly say, there is a cognitive dissonance. People don't want to really look at the other side of it. And I mean, I'm hearing stories um, coming from inside Ukraine about churches being closed down, about priests and ministers being arrested, and also about press ganging people into action because they're actually running out of troops. What do you make of those stories?
Well, this is what's really happening in Ukraine. I mean, you get one narrative from the mainstream media which is completely false, but what's happening is there for everybody to see on social media now.
Mm,
The press ganging
yeah,
of people. I mean, you thought this is something that's gone out with the 18th century, but this is happening now. I mean, I feel very sorry for the poor young Ukrainian men who've got no military experience whatsoever because they've run out of soldiers. They've been decimated over in the war of attrition and in the trenches. Now they're going around press ganging, poor young men to go to the front, and what they last 24 hours and then they're dead. I mean, this is absolutely appalling. And the people, the globalists in the West want to keep this going. And they talk about freedom and democracy. But there is no freedom and democracy in Ukraine. I mean, my friend Gonzalo Lira was arrested on the 1st of May, and he's been locked up and disappeared. I don't know where he is. No one knows where he is. No, he's been taken by the Ukrainian Secret Service. What for? For talking to a camera, for talking on YouTube. He's done nothing wrong. But this is the freedom that you have in Ukraine. It's no freedom whatsoever. And there's no democracy because he's banned all of the other political parties. And he said, well, he's going to delay elections now until after the conflict has ended, whatever that means. And there's no free press anymore because he shut down all of the press organizations and television stations, which are not the official government television station. So there's no freedom. There's no democracy. There's just terror in Ukraine.
Absolutely.
And that's backed by neo-Nazis. Well, that's the reality.
It is. It's very true. And this is the information that's coming out, and good people like yourself, you've got the tenacity, you've got the bravery and resilience to actually put all these points out. And as you were mentioning, kind of alluding to Mr. Tice, he's kind of, I don't want you to obviously deep dive on him because we've only got so long, but obviously there's parties like that are seen as alternative centre-right, and they've taken the narrative hook, line and sinker because they're afraid to comment and put their head above the parapet. You just hear little rumblings, and to a lot of new people to politics, this isn't good enough. But just to get your take on the on where this actually ends up, because the West is running out of materials very, very quickly. They don't have the manufacturing base to produce weapons and goods, certainly like the Russians do. They're running out of resources very, very quickly, and this is going to come to an end sooner rather than later. We'll hope and pray for, because Chinese have backed the Russians. When do you think this comes to an end? Looking at your crystal ball for me.
You're actually right. I mean, so they've run out of men. The regular army has either been, they've either been killed or injured mostly. So that they're losing men by tens of thousands every week. In this counteroffensive, it's just a slaughter. They're running out of weapons. So every time the Western leaders escalate by sending HIMARS and then Patriot and then Storm Shadow and then Leopard tanks and Challenger tanks, every time they just get blown up. They get taken out, or they go onto the black market. So it's not working. They're running out of weapons. So now Biden is sending cluster bombs, which is hideous. There is absolutely no morality in that guy whatsoever. It's against every understanding of international agreement. You don't do that. So they're desperate, but even that is not working. It's not turning the tide of the battle. So the Russians have broken through the Ukrainian lines near Kupiansk in the north of Bakhmut, because the Ukrainian lines are getting thinner and thinner and thinner. Sure. It's only a matter of time before they run out of men and weapons entirely, and the front lines collapse everywhere. And then the Russians will be free to, just walk, up to the Dnieper River, essentially. Yeah. That will happen sooner or later. I think the Western leaders realize, with the tensions coming out at the NATO conference, like we touched on before, they know the game is up. They know that, that this is not working. Even the New York Times last week or this week has written a couple of articles suggesting that, well, Ukraine isn't going to win now. This is going to be a very long stalemate. Now, that's a massive change from the prime warmongering paper and mouthpiece of the Biden regime, from we're going to win, we're going to win, we're going to win, to, well, this is stalemate. So that's kind of admission. It's not going to plan. It is going to end sooner rather than later. And thank goodness for that, because it will stop the slaughter, I think, and everyone who supported this dreadful war needs to be gone. They need to be out of office. They need to be out of power. They need to be brought down. and put somewhere where they never affect anyone else again. That's my view anyway.
Amen. Amen to all of that, David. It is a disgrace, and those people will walk away. The people like Joe Biden will be carried away or wheeled away at the rate he's going. And Rishi Sunak will maybe have an extra couple of billion in the bank. He's toast. I mean, you just have to look at the by-election results to find out that he's gone. I mean, they got the ULEZ in Uxbridge and Ruslet, I think, because, sorry, they got the seat because of ULEZ.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly. Yeah.
I know you're involved heavily with London. You know, you're well known in London, sir, and well loved in London, and that's spreading throughout the rest of the UK. There's no doubt about that. Not just blowing smoke here, but I don't want to get into the ULEZ situation. Maybe we can do that another day because I've got a lot of contacts down in London, having lived there myself for 10 years. But just in the time we've got left, thank you very much for the Russian Ukraine situation, because there needs to be more of this. You've encapsulated it fantastically well.
Thank you.
We get into the intricate locations, and people, I think it's a bit like chaff and flare. It's there to confuse a lot of people about the geography, about where actually the fighting's going on and how well they're doing. There's a piece in the Daily Telegraph today on pages 4 and 5, and it's got a complete spread of where it's going, what's happening, and how Ukraine is winning. I think these people need to go back and look at the definition of winning again. But look, on to another subject. Nigel Farage is well known to you, sir. You've worked with him for many years, and you know him very, very well. Was he the wrong person to pick on by Coots?
Yeah, I mean, this is a much, much bigger issue than just Nigel Farage, but he's become like a lightning rod, if you like, for the issue. This is banks cancelling people and cancel culture in general. But, you know, cancelling people from having access to banking facilities is far more damaging to people than stopping them from speaking on a stage, because you're actually disqualifying them, you're excluding them from life in total. They can't engage in the economy if they don't have a bank account, or it's very, very difficult to these days. So I think is a very, very good thing that he's taken up the baton and he's made this public. It could have been anyone, it could have been any bank, because this is going on with loads of banks. I mean, even on the day that he broke the story, there was another story of someone else that I know called Mike Davidson, who runs a couple of charities, a couple of Christian charities, and he was debanked by Barclays, and he'd won £20,000 compensation for being debanked, because they've said, this was because of his views. So this is not just Nigel Farage, but obviously he has the biggest platform, has a huge platform in the media, obviously his show on prime time on GB News. So, it's very good that this has developed in the way it has, and is actually now showing that this is wrong, that they are actually debanking people for their opinions. And that should not happen in this country. I mean, it would have been unthinkable 10 years ago, because no one would have done it. I mean, this is all new. And it's this ESG ideology, this environmental, social and governmental, which has come in, and that's a very new thing. But it comes on the back of the equality, diversity and inclusion agenda, which also is relatively new, but been going on for a little bit longer. But, it's all part of the long march through the institutions to capture them, to change their values, or to put in sort of new values, as they say. And so banking, as a lot of industry and a lot of institutions, their main concern now is policing people's values rather than looking after people's money, which is insane. Banking should be about looking after people's money, and that's it. It should not be about policing people's values and policing people's opinions. And what Nigel Farage has done, on behalf of thousands and thousands of people, is that he's shown up, this is what's happening. And there's many, many more people who are appalled at this and
Mm.
stand against this than the small number of people, albeit powerful people, who are instigating this kind of thing in our institutions. And again, they need to be gone, and we need to get rid of this ESG scoring, this equality, diversity, and inclusion agenda, which is not actually inclusive, because it excludes people if they deem you to have the wrong opinion. So this is a gaslighting phrase, which is a complete inversion of the reality of what they're doing.
Well, life is all about opportunities, and politics is certainly about opportunities, as you well know. And this has really set up an open goal to talk about central banking digital currency, the World Economic Forum, the deep state, because it affects people's livelihoods, it affects their lives, and as you correctly said, it affects their ability to function. They're effectively persona non grata. And it wasn't just Nigel that they kicked in the teeth, metaphorically speaking, it was his family. And if you mess with a man's family, you're really going after him in the biggest possible way. And that's why I think this, from left and right, David, from across the political divide, people that can't stand Nigel or his policies have actually rallied behind him. And I think it's just going to make him even more powerful. And people like yourself who are speaking out against this. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've had this in our manifesto from the very beginning, that people should have the right to use cash, and people,
Yes.
should have the right to participate in society and to participate in the economy, essentially. So absolutely. But the plan is to bring in central bank digital currencies. So if that happens, the plan from the World Economic Forum and their puppets in the cabinets and the governments around the world, if that happens, they will actually get rid of all commercial banks. There won't be commercial banks anymore.
Yeah.
There won't be cash anymore, and you will be prohibited from using anything to purchase and to using anything as a currency apart from central bank digital currency. So I think people just haven't really grasped what that actually entails. So all of these banks that we're now fighting against, they will be gone. They won't exist.
Should the Treasury, I agree, should the Treasury take back control of the banking situation? Should they actually take back control after they were deregulated by Gordon Brown?
You need to be careful what you wish for. I mean, so there was, people talk about the Bradbury pound back in 1913. I think that was a good thing. You had sovereign money, and the government could create the sovereign money, and it wasn't based on debt. Central bank digital currencies will be a completely different thing, because they would be controlled by the Bank of England, or in the US, the Federal Reserve. And they actually are private entities, well, the Federal Reserve is, rather than sort of the Treasury, which is a sovereign entity. So, there's all kinds of hidden things behind the scenes that I don't even totally understand about what's the relationship between the Treasury, the Bank of England, the Crown Corporation. I mean, I'm still looking into that. There's a lot of opacity and a lot of smoke and mirrors, and so I still find that hard to get my head around. If something comes in terms of sovereign money, it needs to really be sovereign and to enhance freedom. But you must be careful that we don't wish for a system and implement a system where there's a bait and switch and gets us into the slave system where we're controlled anyway. But my preference would be, gold and silver. Gold and silver is God's money, and any currency should be backed by gold and silver. The problem is, we've had fiat currency since 1971. That, by its very nature, is inherently inflationary, and now we're going into the realms of hyperinflation. If we're not careful, the whole thing is going to collapse. Some people might say that's inevitable. But what goes in its place? This is a much, much wider discussion, and there's so much more.
But maybe we'll get you on another time, because the damage done by Rishi Sunak and Hunt has been cataclysmic on our economy. And I know you've really gone in on it, and your party, the Heritage Party, have spoken out about the lockdowns. From day one, you were on the case saying, look, the damage financially, not just socially as well, but the damage financially this is going to do to our country, 500 billion, David. That's a conservative estimate. no pun intended. And obviously under Labour and the SNP, the Liberal Democrats, it'd be even worse because they were looking to lock down even further. But the Heritage Party and yourself and your good self were saying right away, we need to end the madness of lockdowns. Am I right?
Absolutely. Yeah. The lockdowns, they did incredible damage to our economy. And that's it. With the quantitative easing you had, you mentioned 500 billion pounds there just for the lockdown. And that's on top of all the other rubbish that we're spending money on, that you can foreign aid and migrant hotels and HS2 and diversity offices and Quangos and net zero and the Ukraine war. You can put it all together. You've got probably £1 trillion of extra debt. Yeah, if you have a fiat currency, you have to be totally responsible and never spend more than you have because it's not backed by anything. But the trouble is the governments can do that. They can, because we've got a hard currency, they can borrow and borrow and borrow, do more quantitative easing. And every time they do that, that feeds into inflation. So if you increase the amount of currency by 25%, which is what they've done in lockdown, you automatically will get 25% inflation, because you're increasing the number of currency units by 25%. That is just, basic economics. And because they haven't been responsible. So to make the system we have even begin to function properly again on a long-term basis, we need to get back to balance. Never spend more than you bring in taxation or whatever, and stop being financially irresponsible and spending money that you don't have.
Absolutely, well said, and I think that's why people should go and check out your economic rationale on the Heritage Party website, which we will leave the links to, because as the war goes on, as the net zero lunacy, as I call it, and I think you call it as well, goes on, it doesn't look good for the future. We don't want people to be really pessimistic about things, but with the rising costs and war, the pressures put on our entire infrastructure through mass unlimited unfettered immigration. That's why we need people like you, Mr. David Curtin. That's why we need parties like the Heritage Party to grow. And if people are feeling that they don't have a way of addressing these things, I recommend they check you out. And that's going to be a good thing, I think, seeing you emerging. And there are a few others emerging, but I think they really need to start reading the pages and watching your interviews and watching your great YouTube videos, which I'll put a link to. But all it remains for me to say now is, Mr. David Curtin, thank you very much indeed for coming on to Herd Immunity News.
Thank you.
Cheers.